Freakonomics, a rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything, by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. Picture this. You're running a daycare and you've got a problem. Every single day, a handful of parents stroll in late to pick up their kids. The children are anxious, your teachers are frustrated, and nobody's getting paid to stay after hours. Something's gotta give. So you bring in some economists, because why not? They suggest what sounds like pure genius. Charge a fine. $3 for every parent who shows up more than 10 minutes late. Simple, right? A little financial nudge to get people back on track. You roll out the policy and wait for the magic to happen. Except, the number of late parents doesn't go down. It doubles. Wait, what? How does punishing bad behavior actually make it worse? Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of Freakonomics. When this book dropped in 2005, it hit like a bomb. It climbed the bestseller lists and basically refused to leave. Millions of copies sold, translations in dozens of languages, and more importantly, it rewired how people think about, well, pretty much everything. The book was born from an unlikely friendship. First, you've got Stephen D. Levitt, this young hotshot economist from the University of Chicago, who just snagged what people call the Junior Nobel Prize. But here's the kicker. Levitt himself will tell you he's terrible at traditional economics. Math isn't his thing, and don't even ask him about the stock market. What he does have is this insatiable curiosity and a knack for asking questions that make you go, I never thought about that. Questions like, why do drug dealers still live with their mothers if they're supposedly rolling in cash? Or what could teachers and sumo wrestlers possibly have in common when it comes to cheating? Then you've got Stephen J. Dubner, a journalist who was sent to write a profile on this peculiar economist. They clicked, and together they created something entirely new. They called it Freakonomics. This isn't your typical economics textbook about markets and money. It's more like a detective story about everyday life, peeling back the layers to see what's really going on beneath the surface. By the time we're done here, you're going to see the world differently. You'll start spotting the hidden incentives driving people's choices. You'll question the so-called conventional wisdom everyone accepts without thinking, and you'll realize that big effects often come from the most unexpected, far-off causes. Sound good? Let's dive in. So what happened at that daycare? The $3 fine was supposed to be a deterrent. Instead, it accidentally did something sneaky. It killed the guilt. Before the fine, late parents felt genuinely bad. They knew they were being inconsiderate, making a teacher wait unpaid. That guilt was powerful. But once the fine showed up, that guilt evaporated. For $3 measly, parents could buy themselves a completely clear conscience. The fine sent an unintended message. Being late isn't that serious. For busy parents, $3 for some bonus babysitting was actually a pretty sweet deal. This is lesson number 1 in Freakonomics. Incentives run the world. If you want to understand human behavior, follow the incentives. They're like tiny levers that can move mountains, but mess them up and you'll push things in exactly the wrong direction. The authors break incentives into 3 types. Economic, like fines or bonuses. Social, like the shame of being judged by other parents. And moral, like your own internal compass of right and wrong. Usually these work together. But sometimes, like at the daycare, they crash into each other. There's even a study about blood donations, where offering people cash actually reduced donations. Suddenly, giving blood went from a noble act of charity to a lousy way to earn pocket change, and people weren't interested. Of course, where there are incentives, there's cheating. As the saying goes, if something's worth having, it's worth cheating for. And Freakonomics reveals that cheating is absolutely everywhere. Case in point, in 1987, 7 million American children vanished overnight. Not from a mass kidnapping, but from tax forms. The IRS had just started requiring Social Security numbers for dependent children. Poof! 7 million fake kids, invented purely for tax breaks, disappeared into thin air. But cheating doesn't just happen with taxes. The authors take us somewhere unexpected. The classroom. Not the students cheating, but the teachers. In the 90s, high-stakes testing became the law of the land in places like Chicago. Your school's funding, your job as a teacher, even whether your school stayed open, all came down to test scores. That created a massive incentive. Teachers whose students bombed could lose their jobs. So how would a teacher cheat? Stephen Levitt, being the data genius he is, got his hands on test answers from every Chicago public school student over 7 years. Nearly 100 million answers. Then he built an algorithm to hunt down the cheaters. He thought like a cheater would. You wouldn't change every answer because that's too obvious and takes too much time. Maybe you'd focus on a string of tough questions near the end and quietly fill in the right answers for your struggling students. The algorithm searched for suspicious patterns, like a whole classroom of weak students suddenly nailing the hardest questions in identical order, or students who had miraculous one-year score jumps, only to crash back down the next year. And boy, did he find them. In one 6th grade class, 15 out of 22 students, most of whom were struggling, somehow got the exact same 6 difficult questions right. The odds of that? Basically impossible. The algorithm even caught that the teacher had filled in some wrong answers too, probably to throw people off the scent, or maybe because she didn't actually know the right answers herself. The worst part? These kids were promoted believing they'd earned it, only to completely fall apart in 7th grade because they'd never learned the material. The cheating teacher wasn't helping her students, she was helping herself. After Levitt published his findings, the head of Chicago schools actually used the algorithm to fire the cheaters. The next year, cheating dropped by over 30%. The incentive had shifted. This theme keeps showing up. Experts abuse their position, which leads to one of the book's most memorable questions. How is the Ku Klux Klan like a group of real estate agents? Sounds bizarre, but the answer is brilliant. Both groups get their power from information that you don't have. That's called information asymmetry. Let's start with the Klan. In the 1940s, the KKK was making a comeback. Their power wasn't just violence, it was fear. And that fear fed on mystery. Secret handshakes, weird rituals, made-up language where a conversation became a clonversation. All that secrecy made them seem untouchable and terrifying. Then along came Stetson Kennedy, a writer who despised the Klan. He realized fighting them head-on was pointless. The real weapon was information. Kennedy used a Klan insider to learn all their secrets, then did something genius. He gave them to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show. Suddenly, kids all over America were running around using the Klan's secret passwords in their games. The Klan's sacred rituals became punchlines on a children's show. Kennedy turned their most powerful weapon, their secrets, into a joke. Stripped of their mystique, the Klan started to crumble. He flipped their information advantage upside down. Now what about real estate agents? You hire an agent because they're experts. They know the market. They know what your house is worth. They know the buyers. They've got a huge information edge. And you're trusting them to use it to get you the best possible price, right? But let's look at the incentives. An agent gets around 6% commission, but that's split with the buyer's agent, and then each gives half to their agency. So your agent only pockets about 1.5% of the sale price. On your $300,000 house, that's $4,500. But say she works harder and sells it for $310,000 instead. That extra $10,000 is huge for you. But for her 1.5% cut of that extra $10,000 is only $150. So is she really going to grind for weeks for an extra $150? Levitt checked the data. He analyzed nearly 100,000 home sales in Chicago, including thousands sold by agents themselves. He compared how agents sell their own homes versus their clients' homes. The results were eye-opening. When agents sell their own houses, they keep them on the market about 10 days longer and sell for over 3% more. That's an extra $10,000 on a $300,000 house. When she's selling your house, her incentive is to close the deal fast. Her tiny slice of a higher price isn't worth the wait. She uses her information advantage to create urgency, maybe mentioning that nicer house down the street that's been sitting unsold for months, turning her knowledge into your fear. But here's the good news. The internet is destroying information asymmetry. Websites that let you compare prices for things like life insurance caused prices to plummet. The secrets experts once hoarded are now a few clicks away. The gap between experts and regular people is shrinking fast. Which brings us to maybe the most famous and controversial idea in Freakonomics: what really caused the massive drop in crime in America. In the early 90s, the U.S. was drowning in crime. Experts predicted a coming wave of teenage super predators who would unleash a bloodbath of violence. President Clinton warned the country was heading for chaos. Then something totally unexpected happened. Crime started falling, and falling, and falling, across every category, everywhere. The experts who'd been predicting disaster were completely blindsided. So what happened? The experts scrambled to explain it. They pointed to the booming economy, smarter policing strategies like New York's broken windows approach, tougher gun laws. These were comforting explanations. They suggested we'd been in control all along. There was just one problem. According to Levitt's analysis, they were almost all wrong. The economy? Research shows virtually no link between economic growth and violent crime. Better policing? Crime dropped everywhere, even in cities with terrible police departments. Gun laws? With a thriving black market, criminals don't exactly shop legally. The death penalty? Executions are so rare they don't create any meaningful deterrent. So what really happened? Levitt's data pointed to a few factors. More police officers helped. A huge increase in the prison population mattered too. Criminals behind bars can't commit street crimes, and the crack cocaine boom of the 80s ending played a role. When crack profits dried up, so did much of the violence. But all those factors combined only explained about half the drop. There was another factor, a much bigger one that nobody wanted to talk about. It was something that had happened more than 20 years earlier, involving a young woman in Dallas named Norma McCorvey, known to the world as Jane Roe. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide in Roe v. Wade. This had a massive delayed effect, and the authors are crystal clear. This isn't a moral argument about abortion. It's purely about data. Here's the logic. Decades of research show that children born into difficult circumstances, poverty, single-parent homes, teenage mothers, are statistically far more likely to become criminals later. These were exactly the situations of millions of women most likely to have abortions after Roe v. Wade. For whatever reason, they felt unprepared to provide a stable home. Because of Roe v. Wade, these children, who had the highest statistical risk of becoming criminals, were never born. Years later, just as this generation would have hit prime crime-committing age, the crime rate plummeted. The pool of potential criminals had dramatically shrunk. The authors use a powerful reverse example. In 1966, Romania's dictator Nicolae Ceausescu banned abortion to boost population. The kids born after this ban had terrible lives. Compared to kids born just a year earlier, they did worse in school, struggled more in the job market, and were far more likely to become criminals. And in 1989, it was precisely this generation of unwanted children, now young adults, who led the violent revolution that overthrew and executed Ceausescu. The connection between legalized abortion and falling crime is uncomfortable and jarring. It's an example of a huge effect with a distant, subtle cause. But according to the data, it explains more of the 90s crime drop than all other factors combined. This takes us to the book's final, deeply personal territory, parenting. If an unwanted child faces such long odds, what gives a wanted child the best shot at a good life? What makes a perfect parent? Modern parents are drowning in expert advice, most of it contradictory and fear-based. We're terrified of screwing up. We worry about guns at the neighbor's house, but forget about their swimming pool, even though kids are about 100 times more likely to die in a pool than in a gun accident. We fear the dramatic and rare, not the common and quiet. So with all this obsessive parenting, how much do parents actually matter? The authors analyzed a massive government study called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, which tracked over 20,000 children from kindergarten through 5th grade. Using regression analysis, basically isolating individual factors to see their real impact, they uncovered some shocking findings. Tons of things parents do seem to matter way less than we think. For instance, the data showed no link between kids, test scores, and whether parents read to them daily, or took them to museums, or how much TV they watched, or even whether the family stayed intact. This is brutal news for any parent who's dutifully read Goodnight Moon 1,000 times. So what does matter? The data pointed elsewhere, not what parents do, but who parents are. Kids with highly educated parents tend to do well. Kids whose parents have high socioeconomic status do well. Kids whose mothers were 30 or older at first birth do well. The pattern? It's less about your parenting techniques and more about who you are. Smart, successful, educated parents tend to have smart, successful, educated kids. The things that truly matter were often decided long before you cracked open a parenting manual. Who you are, who you married, the life you lead. This gets powerfully reinforced in the book's final exploration, A Child's Name. Does the name you pick affect their future? There's the bizarre true story of two brothers, one named Winner, the other Loser. In a perfect twist, Loser Lane became a successful police sergeant while Winner Lane racked up a long criminal record. So names aren't destiny. But do they matter at all? The authors examined a huge database of California birth certificates and found stark differences between names black parents and white parents choose. They found that, on average, someone with a distinctly black name, like Deshaun, has worse life outcomes than someone with a distinctly white name like Jake. So the name's the problem, right? Employers see Deshaun on a resume and discriminate? Not quite. The data reveals something deeper. A name isn't a cause, it's an indicator. The kind of parent who names their son Jake is, on average, more likely to be educated and higher income than the parent who names their son Deshaun. It's not the name holding Deshaun back. It's the circumstances he was born into. Circumstances merely reflected in his name. It circles back to the same powerful lesson. What matters most isn't what you call your child, but who you are. As we wrap up our journey through Freakonomics, there's one thread running through every strange and fascinating story. It's not really economics. It's not even data. It's a way of thinking. It's having the guts to question what everyone else accepts as obvious truth. We live in a world drowning in information, yet we're constantly guided by what economist John Kenneth Galbraith called conventional wisdom. These are the comfortable, simple, convenient ideas we cling to like life rafts. The economy stops crime. Good schools make smart kids. The name you choose shapes your child's destiny. These feel right. They make sense. But as Freakonomics shows us over and over, they're often dead wrong. The most powerful lesson here is that the world is far more knowable than we think. But to understand it, we have to be willing to set aside our feelings, biases, and even our moral compass, just for a moment, and follow where the data leads. The book reminds us that morality represents the world as we wish it to be, while economics represents the world as it actually is. And sometimes that gap is enormous. Why does this matter now? Because we're constantly being sold stories by politicians, marketers, experts of every flavor. They use information, and our lack of it, to shape our choices. They exploit our emotions, especially fear, because emotion kills rational thought. The ability to think like a Freakonomist is basically a superpower today. It's the ability to step back and ask simple but powerful questions. What's the real incentive here? What does the data actually show? What if the opposite is true? This book doesn't hand you easy answers. Instead, it gives you better questions. And that's infinitely more valuable. So what can you do with this right now? Here are a few ideas. First, next time you see behavior that seems weird or irrational, don't just judge it. Get curious. Ask yourself, what hidden incentive might be driving this person? What reward or penalty, visible only to them, is shaping their actions? Second, next time an expert on TV or in an article throws a shocking statistic at you, pause. Ask yourself, what's their agenda? What do they gain from making me believe this? Is there another side to this story nobody's telling? And finally, start looking at your own world with fresh eyes. The book's subtitle is A Rogue Economist Explores the Hidden Side of Everything. The key word there is explores. You don't need a PhD to be an explorer. You just need curiosity and a willingness to see things not as they appear, but as they really are. That's our summary of Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. We've hit the major ideas, but let me be honest. A summary is like looking at photos of a great adventure. The real magic happens when you experience it yourself. It's in those quiet moments when a story or phrase connects with you in ways you didn't expect. This summary exists to help you decide if this is a journey you want to take. If anything we've talked about sparked your curiosity, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the hidden patterns in your own life. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you something to think about, please hit that like button and subscribe. That way, you won't miss our next dive into another life-changing book. Let's keep exploring, and let's keep growing together.